So 2.8, we're going to talk about the inverse of functions. So when we're taking the inverse, our x's and y's just flip. The domain of our function becomes the range becomes the domain. So in example 4, it says find the inverse for the specific values. So typically we would have f of x is equal to y. So the number inside the parentheses is our x. What it's equal to is our y. So we would have a point here that's 1, 5. The next point would be 3, 7. And then the other point would be 8, -10. So here when it's asking us for the inverse, the x's and y's flip. So our points would flip. So the inverse, which is labeled as f with that little -1 on top of it, that's just the name for the inverse, would be 5, 1, 7, 3, and -10, 8. So the x's and y's just flip positions. So when it asks us for the inverse of 5, when x is 5 for our inverse, what's our y? 1. For the inverse of 7, when x is 7, what's our y? 3. And then for the inverse of -10, when x is -10, what's our y? 8. So on this page, it talks about how to find the inverse of a one-to-one function. Typically, we would see either f of x or y. F of x is just a fancy way of saying y. These mean the same thing. If you see f of x, you just want to cross it off and put y. The next step that we would do is flip the x's and y's. So we change all the y's to be x, all the x's to be y's, and then solve for x. Or technically now you're solving for y. So in the end, you're going to make your equation y equals. And then we always want to change the name just to be the inverse. So again, this little -1 on top just means that it is naming the inverse. So let's do example 7. We want to find the inverse of the function. So I'm going to change f of x to be y. Now I want to flip the x's and y's. So my y I'm going to change to be x. The x I'm going to change to be y. So I have x is equal to 3y minus 2. Now we want to solve our equation to be y equals. So I have to undo everything on the right side of our equation, make it y equals. Ryan, what would I do first?
You gotta get the y by itself.
How?
You start with 2.
So let's add 2, move it to the other side. So I have x plus 2 is equal to 3y. Sam, what would I do next?
You
Divide by 3. So we get x plus 2 over 3 is equal to y. Now that we have our y all by itself, this is our inverse, so we can name it as the inverse. I'm going to say f -1 of x is equal to x plus 2 over 3. So once you get the y all by itself, that's your inverse, and you just want to name it as the inverse. So I'm going to find the inverse algebraically. So I want to change f of x to be y, and then I flip the x and y. So I make y x, and I make x y. So I have x is equal to 2 times y plus 7 squared minus 3. Now we want to make this y equals. So what would we do first? Add the 3. So I'm going to add 3, move it to the other side. X plus 3 is equal to 2 times y plus 7 squared. What do we do next? Divide by 2. So x plus 3 over 2 is equal to y plus 7 squared. What do we do next? Square root both sides. So to get rid of the squared, we want to take the square root. So the square root of x plus 3 over 2 is equal to y plus 7. And then what would we do next? Subtract 7. So here, I'm going to write it over here so we have more room. So y is equal to the square root of x plus 3 over 2 minus 7. Now we want to make sure we name it as the inverse, so we want to change it to be f to the power of negative 1 of x. Just because it started with f of x, we want to finish it with f of x. Just make sure you have that little inverse symbol. Don't forget to name the inverse. All right, let's do number 2. Joey, what would we do first?
I guess x equals to x squared. Oh, actually, y equals to x squared.
So we change this to be y, and then what?
And just add, subtract 4.
We're going to flip the x and y.
So yeah, x and y and subtract 4.
So I have x is equal to y squared plus 4, and then we subtract 4. We want to get the y by itself, so we have to undo everything on the right side. So I have x minus 4 is equal to y squared.
Square root both sides, and you get square root x minus 4 equals y.
We're going to square root both sides.
And then you get your answer.
So square root of x minus 4 is equal to y. Once our y is all by itself, we are done there, so we can name it as our inverse. So we put the f, negative 1 of x is equal to square root of x minus 4. All right, number 3, we want to change f of x to be y and then flip our x and y. So I have x is equal to negative 5 times y squared plus 3. What would we do first to solve for y? Subtract 3. So x minus 3 is equal to negative 5y squared. Then what?
Divide by negative 5.
Divide by negative 5. So x minus 3 over negative 5 is equal to y squared. And then what?
Square root.
Square root. Perfect. Square root both sides. So this would be the square root of x minus 3 over negative 5 is equal to y. So we're done. So I'm going to name this as our inverse. So f negative 1 of x. All right, let's do 4. So I'm going to change f of x to be y and then flip my x and y. So I have x is equal to 5 minus 3y over 2. What would I do first to solve for y here? Multiply by 2. So I'm going to multiply everything on the right side times 2 and x times 2. So we have 2x is equal to, now on the right side, the 2 cancels out with the 2 that's being divided. So it's 2x is equal to 5 minus 3y. The top part stays the same. What would we do next? Perfect, minus 5. So 2x minus 5 is equal to negative 3y. And then what? Divide by negative 3. So 2x minus 5 over negative 3 is equal to y. Once we're done, we want to remember to name it as our inverse, so f negative 1 of x. So if I had a graph that had points like 1, 2, The inverse would be the opposite. So instead of having a point as 1, 2, we'd flip the x and y, so it'd have a point as 2, 1. So same thing with graphing, just the x's and y's flip.